One element of recording and mixing that I notice a lot of students have an issue with is understanding what a bus or an aux is. Right? Okay, these are terms that get thrown around and confuse people because they mean the same thing. Right? And Logic, as an example, as a DAW, uses both of these terms within the same software, which twists people's minds. I'm not really sure why they decided to do that, but often other softwares will just choose one or the other to work with, but they're both the same, right? And let's decode actually what a bus is. The first way to think of it is actually like the term bus. You know, this is actually a good term. My stick figure is here. Okay, so why do we use a bus in the first place in society, right? Imagine there's 4 people here. Now, normally it's like each of those 4 people can have a car, right? Okay, imagine each of these people have a car. Now, but they're going to the same location. It's not really the most efficient for them to each have a car in this situation, right? So let's say they're all going to school. Right? Well, first of all, maybe they're not old enough to drive, but let's assume they are old enough to drive. That's just really inefficient to send everybody with an individual car when they're going to the same location. So that's when we have like a school bus, right? And that's the whole point of the bus, is to allow multiple people to go to the same location, right? Okay. This is very much how we're going to use a bus in DAWs. One of the ways. This is also what confuses people, is that there's more than one ways we can use a bus or an aux. But the first way I want to talk about is just the simplest way, which is the idea that instead of each individual source going to a place, we're going to all get on a bus and go there collectively, just like how subways work in New York City, right? Imagine if everybody had an individual car in New York City. There's already so many of them. It would just be insane with on average, there's like 8 million people that live in the city alone. That's not even commuters. Okay, so now let's think of an audio signal, or signals. Okay, let's say we've got some guitars here. Well, I don't really know what kind of guitar that is, but not a very attractive one. Okay, I'm going to do a V on this one, because why not, right? Okay, so let's just say, do another V. Kinda. Okay, so now we've got 4 V guitars here. Okay, but we want to combine the sound of them. Maybe send them all to one place. Which, by the way, is what happens when it ends up at your stereo output anyway. That is a form of a bus. It's your master bus. Everything is being combined at that one place. But let's say we want to combine them beforehand, because let's say you have a mix going and you've balanced these 4 guitars. But maybe, let's think of the 4 guitars, maybe that since you have these balanced, I'm just going to draw faders below each of these here. Okay. So you see how I have different levels for these guitars. Let's say we get, this is a really nice balance that we have going between these 4 guitars. We don't necessarily want to tweak that balance because we have a real sweet sound happening here, but we may need to turn the whole collection of these guitars down a bit in the whole mix before it reaches the master, your stereo output. Maybe in relation to the drum kit or something, they're too hot or too quiet. So we want to combine them into a bus. Right. So that what that means is we send the output of each of these channels, right, to our bus. We're going to send each of the outputs of these channels to our guitar bus. And what that means is they all land here. They all land on this guitar bus that we've created. Some DAWs you actually have to create a bus or an aux. In Pro Tools they call them Auxes. So you have to create an aux. And everything lands there as it's a destination before it goes to the master bus. Sometimes people call it a mix bus, right? Sometimes it's called output, right? It depends on what DAW you're using, okay? Which, by the way, I always try to leave at unity, right? Just at 0. I never touch the volume of master bus. I always try to make my tweaks prior to the bus and not touch the fader there. Okay, so now, because all these 4 guitars are being sent to the guitar bus, I could preserve these levels for them. And I could just bring the balance of all of them up and down. We do this a lot with drums, right? So let's think of drums for a second here. So if we have a drum kit, we're going to do a small kit here because it saves time and save you the torture of having to watch me poorly draw these faders. Let's do a bass drum, a snare drum. Let's do stereo overheads. Okay, right. Often, you know, we're going to adjust some different levels here. Maybe the snare drum, and maybe this is our mix for the drums. What we want to often do is we want to send this balance to what we're calling a drum bus in order to be able to adjust the collection of these drums in relation to the rest of the mix. So in other words, the bass drum is going to be sent to the drum bus, the snare drum is going to be sent to the drum bus, the overhead left and the overhead right are all being sent to the drum bus. So these balances, these levels of these channels show up at the drum bus, which then we can adjust up or down, but it keeps these balances straight, or the way they were, and we're just turning the balance of them down. And then that goes to your master bus, right? I'm just going to call it mix bus. And it goes there, right? This is a great way to organize and be able to adjust groups of instruments. When I'm mixing and even engineering, and for playback and stuff, I pretty quickly start creating groups of instruments. It just makes it easier. You got to solo the drums, you know, solo guitar. It makes it easy when you need to make stems. So a lot of times these days, if you're working on film or TV, video games, you have to create stems. So send me all the guitars, send me all the drums, right? Send me all the synths. And this way, it's easily achievable because I just go and I hit solo, you know, on the drum bus, and all the drums and percussion are soloed. There's another reason we like to do this, though. Like, say there's drum bus, I'm able to add effects, and it'll affect all the incoming signals. And one common thing we like to do is we like to put compression on the drum bus. So it's compressing the sum of the drums. So instead of going through and compressing each of the drums, which sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't, sending to the bus allows us to put a compressor or an EQ on the whole blend of the drums together instead of individual drums, which is really nice because sometimes, you know, drums, there are a bunch of individual instruments combined together to make one whole sound, and sometimes getting a blend happening, sending it to a drum bus, and then being able to put EQ and compression on it allows you to continue to treat it as, put it back together as being one whole instrument instead of individual instruments captured, right? This is the point now where we're combining them to become one sound, and it allows me to add EQ and compression and stuff on it from that perspective. Now, this is like, I would call this is the summing way of doing busing, right? So summing, this is when we're going to take a variety of tracks and combine them, just like a school bus, a bunch of kids getting on a school bus to go to the school, the same location, right? These are a bunch of drums getting on a bus that then goes to the same location, which is the mix bus. Think of our mix bus as being school, right? That's our school. I don't know that that's a school building and what this part is here. Question mark, I don't know. And that's a very strange looking school. Okay. Anyway, so the mix bus basically is our destination, our school, our aquatic school. Okay. Now, let's talk about another way that we can use buses. So this is a flip side of using buses. I'm going to go back to our scenario of, let's go back to 4 guitars for this. I'm just going to draw the faders, save you the torture of having to look at my oddly misshapen guitar art. Let's just call this guitar 1, guitar 2, guitar 3, guitar 4. Okay. Now, say we recorded these dry, no reverb at all, right? Well, I might want reverb on them. Maybe varying amounts of reverb to each of them. And I didn't record it with reverb because I wanted more flexibility in mixing. There are definitely times where I use reverb on individual channels, or I use reverb while I'm recording. I have some very specific spring reverbs, tape echoes, and actually a digital reverb that I really like to use a lot that is outboard gear. And so there are times when I know I'm going to commit to that sound and I record with it. And there are times where I put an individual reverb on a track because I know I'm looking for a specialty reverb. But there's plenty of times that I like to use the same reverb for a group of instruments. So I might use the same reverb for all electric guitars, right? Just to keep it, I don't know, in the same family. Because if you start using too many reverbs, sometimes that can, I don't know, be a little disorienting, you know, unless you're going for that. A lot of times you're not, and if you are, it's a specialty. So the norm would be more to use the same reverb for multiple so they live in a similar place. It wouldn't be very efficient to use 4 of the same reverbs individually on each of these tracks. Reverbs take up a lot of processing power, so it's kind of a waste of energy. So why not use one reverb to apply to all 4 of those tracks? How do we do that? Well, we're going to create a guitar verb here. And this is actually a bus. And I'm going to put something on here. I'm going to put a plate. Plates sound great on guitar. Okay, so now, how do we send reverb there, or the channels to the reverb? Now, unlike the summing option we were saying, we're not actually going to send the outputs of these channels to here, because we only want to blend this reverb. We still want to hear the dry sound. We want a combination of wet plus dry. Basically, we're going to send some of the signal from these channels to this reverb, and then we're going to adjust the reverb to blend it back in with the dry sound. Okay, so I just want to show something here. So this is our mix bus. Okay. So the output of the guitar reverb is going to go to the mix bus. And the output of each of these guitars are also going to go to the mix bus. This is the wet signal, and these are the dry signals, right? So we have a combination here, so they're both going there. A little different than the summing option, right? Okay. Although we could use them combined. We could create a guitar bus for summing and a guitar reverb, but that's a little in the future. Let's not overcomplicate an already complicated conversation, right? Okay, now what we have is we have on tracks in a lot of in DAWs we have these thing called sends. Right? A lot of times when sends open up in a DAW, sometimes in Pro Tools you can open them up so they look like a fader, but like in Logic they're a dial. Right? And basically what this is saying is it's telling you how much of the track you want to send to the reverb, right? This allows us to create different volumes of signal being sent from each of these guitar tracks, because you're probably not going to want each of these guitars to have the same amount of reverb on it. Using the Send, right? This is a Send in Logic. This is Pro Tools. This is Logic. This allows me to decide how much signal I'm sending, let's say from guitar 2, into the bus, the guitar reverb bus. Higher amounts is going to create more of a reverb sound. Lower sounds is going to be more subtle reverb. And this way, we can send more of guitar 1 to reverb if we wanted to than guitar 3, right? And that's going to be reflected in the wet signal coming out that goes to the mix bus. So the idea of a send equals blended, right? So it's for blending a dry signal and a wet signal together. And this is most often used with effects. Reverb, right? Delay. And sometimes modulation effects even. Chorus, flange. I've used it with phasers because sometimes I find phaser to be a little too potent for my tastes, and some don't have a wet dry option on it, especially in the analog world. And so I on a real mixing console, I will use sends. And by the way, these concepts are completely the same in the analog realm, right? And so this is mainly how I'm using these buses to maximize the usage of reverb and delay. It also, and more so in like the older days, it's getting better and better, but we used to have a lot of issues with computer processing power, and you'd have 1 or 2 reverbs going and your machine would be sweating it, right? And machines are getting more powerful, but still it makes sense to conserve energy depending on how high your track count is, right? I will say that when I'm adding reverbs, I conserve on energy, but I tend to use a reverb for each section if I'm creating buses, right? So drum, verb, and sometimes I'm just sending a snare drum and toms to the drum verb, keys, verb, vocal verb. I'm just going to put 1 here, but sometimes I do a trick where I use more than 1 reverb on vocals, but that's another discussion. Now, well, the benefit of this is that only guitars are going to the guitar verb. Right? That would look at S, didn't it? Guitar verb. Only drums are going to the drum verb. Only keys go to the keys verb. It just keeps it clean. So if I solo any of the reverbs, then I'm not going to be getting drums into the keys reverb. This also makes it better for when you need to make stems. And this way, it's you're not I don't know, sending any a stem that's going to have a snare drum in it, and they're going to be like, why is there a snare drum in here? And you have to rebalance it. So it's just keeping everything organized and clean. So by the time you get to the point in mixing where you're going to make your stems, it makes it that much easier to organize, right, and just be clean about your exports. But that's basically it. So buses, we have 2 options, right? We have for summing, and we have for blending, right? And that's it. And all of these reverbs, of course, they all go to an output. These are the 2 main ways I think about using them. Don't get confused if it says aux, or it says bus, or sometimes in Logic they have this thing called, well, not sometimes, they definitely have it now. It's a legit feature that they have. They call them track stacks. It's like a quick way of creating buses and sums. And it's cool because it's fast and it's a key command, but the problem is that now that adds another term into the music dictionary, and of having to consider and negotiate in your mind, like, okay, well, okay, that's a bus too. It's nothing more than a bus, right? Okay, well, if you have any questions, let me know. Please subscribe to my channel. I'll be making a lot more videos about various comments, trying to find easy, digestible ways to explain music theory. You can find me at Anatomy tone.com. Please subscribe to my channel, like the video, and leave me some comments. I love chatting about music and music theory, philosophy. And let me know what your thoughts are.